LittleBigPlanet is a PlayStation franchise originally created by Media Molecule. From 2008 to today, it has become a fledgling part of Sony's exclusive catalogue, crossing 2 console generations and putting out several spin-offs. In this retrospective, I'll be looking at the 3 mainline games in the series, their story modes and their impact on user-generated content. I'll also include some comments on some community levels and the creation modes. At the time of recording, I was unable to access the online servers, so I'll be relying on other videos which are credited in the description. Let's go. Making games is hard. Any development veteran will tell you that. How many of us were into gaming as teenagers and came up with all kinds of over-the-top ideas for the medium? Further down the line, we realised that getting into the industry takes a lot of training and a strong affinity for technical skills and programming. Our endless fascination with games, their inner intricacies, and their journey from pixels to cinematic stories doesn't always translate into full-time careers. But if you look in the right places, there are creators eager to let their fans take the reins, to unleash their own ingenuity and put it out for all to witness. In 2006, the British studio Media Molecule was founded with this goal in mind. Their earliest prototype, Craftworld, laid the groundwork for a 2D side-scroller that would eventually become LittleBigPlanet. They were soon approached by Sony, who were very impressed with the initial pitch. With just 28 employees to its name, the team put the product together between 2007 and 2008. It quickly grabbed the attention of both journalists and gamers alike, its creation features being placed front and centre. I followed the game closely in the lead up to release and bought it straight away. I enjoyed LittleBigPlanet, but I didn't find myself loving it like most of the masses did. LBP was the very first must-have title for the PlayStation 3, and considering the mostly negative reception the system had at the time, Media Molecule's debut was exactly what it needed. It's the very definition of a gaming exclusive, utilising every element of its platform. The most notable was the PlayStation Network itself. Being free to use at the time, LittleBigPlanet was perfectly placed to cultivate a large community, but it didn't stop there. The PlayStation Eye, widely forgotten and only used by a small proportion of PS3 owners, was also fully incorporated. All the pieces were in place to launch a stellar franchise, and that's exactly what happened on the game's arrival. Much like Sucker Punch's Infamous, LittleBigPlanet starts with no menu in sight. Instead, the game's prologue serves both a showcase and introduction to the game's aesthetic. In effect, it's a seamless tutorial, with the calming voice of Stephen Fry easing you into the controls. Learning to move and jump is a cinch, while the handcrafted look is immediately recognisable. Once you're done with this opening level, you're sent straight to a pod, which serves the main means of accessing the major modes. For an added dose of intuitiveness, the controls are bound to an in-game PS3 controller. That brings us to LittleBigPlanet's big star. What makes Sackboy such a brilliant mascot? Well, for starters, just look at him. With a hand-knit texture and exuberant demeanour, he, she, or it, depending on what you prefer, is simply bursting with charm. The character is as recognisable as Crash Bandicoot or Ratchet & Clank, but unlike those characters, Sackboy can be shaped by the player. An obsessive amount of costume pieces persists across the series, encouraging the player to make this protagonist their own. Animal outfits, skin textures, even looks taken from other franchises. The choices are practically endless. Of course, I went for the Chimera outfits from the Resistance series when it came out on the PlayStation Store. Taking another step, the character is incredibly expressive through non-verbal communication. Tapping different directions on the D-pad makes him happy, sad, angry, or scared. It's a small touch, and you'd think that it wouldn't add a great deal. Displaying this kind of expression allows the player to connect with Sackboy beyond just moving him back and forth, while also tying in with a tone that's fit for all ages. Even his arms are controllable by holding down L2 and R2, yet this is just the start of the franchise's delightful presentation. LittleBigPlanet is based in the realm of arts and crafts, and this is most evident when you start the main story mode. While not the centerpiece of the overall package, it's designed to start piecing together a set of creation items and show off what the developers came up with themselves. All the level components, setups and set pieces can be recreated entirely by the player. The game ditches realism and is all the better for it. At a time when games were pushing for the most detailed graphics, LittleBigPlanet still stands out years later. For example, in one Savannah level, you'll make your way through some meerkat tunnels. Here, standard in-game obstacles are made to look like animals scurrying away as Sackboy goes past them. The rough approximations of exotic objects and creatures make for a visually appealing backdrop, one that you'll appreciate more the deeper you get. The first batch of levels take place in a garden, calling back to those carefree days playing out as a child. The difficulty here is tame and considerate, with only a few obstacles getting in your way. This makes embracing the main action that much more seamless. When talking about the core gameplay, LittleBigPlanet is a relatively straightforward side-scroller. Running and jumping is something any player can pick up and enjoy. It's the use of 3 separate planes that sets it apart. Sackboy can move between lanes throughout each level, and this forms their greater depth. Higher platforms can blend in with those below them, and jumping down is equally as important as the ascent. In this way, LBP reaches beyond the base 2D viewpoints and becomes a 2.5D puzzle platformer. The levels are amalgamations of switches, mechanisms, and obstacles to get past. Hidden throughout the levels are prize bubbles which pop with a satisfying noise upon collection. Typically, when you enter a set of levels, there's a treasure trove of costume pieces waiting for you, but other items won't reveal themselves at first. That brings me to the final component of the gameplay, a more realistic physics system. As opposed to the precision of Mario, Sonic, and other well-known platformers, LittleBigPlanet, its world and characters, are all defined by gravity and other real-world forces. Objects tilt and flip depending on the weight placed on them, and Sackboy has a brief moment where his momentum slows rather than coming to an instant stop. For some players, this would become a point of contention. On the one hand, it allows for simple platforming challenges to spice up the levels, but on the other, it can lead to abrupt deaths that can be a pain when you're trying to ace them. This carries through to prize collection. For casual playthroughs, the floaty jumps and physics aren't an issue, but when you're trying to get precise and grab all those precious collectibles, things become very fiddly. Sackboy can teeter on obstacles, miss an item bubble by mere inches, or accidentally flip an obstacle or vehicle over due to how the physics work. It must have taken a ton of playtesting to make sure the level items all reacted in the right way. Back in 2008, I didn't like this system at all. It felt imprecise to me, especially when I was trying to grab as many trinkets as possible. Playing now, I realise that very few players will collect everything on their first run. If you're looking to be a completionist in this series, you'll need patience and ideally a few friends to join you. That's where the replayability comes in. Every so often you'll come across a sign marked Sackboy X2 or sometimes even X4. This leads to a puzzle requiring at least one extra player. One might see you hold a door open for someone else, and another might be as simple as having 4 players stand on buttons at the same time. Media Molecule designed LittleBigPlanet with multiplayer in mind, being one of few games to offer both online and offline co-op. This feature has aged a fair bit over time. Without the online servers, it's now far more difficult to scour the level and bag that 100% rating. At the time, reviewers did complain about the game's camera and how it struggled to focus with multiple players involved. This was a time before split-screen swapping had been developed, so players had to grin and bear it for the time being. When you do reach the end, 3 awards await. Simply beating the level will give some extra items, but doing so without dying once offers further rewards. Generally, there are plenty of checkpoints throughout the levels, with each one giving 3 lives in single-player mode. Dying too many times will restart the level, which only happened a couple of times in my playthrough. As the story goes on, the locations and colour palette change in drastic ways. Each collection of levels is visually distinctive, with the African savanna having a heavy use of orange. Grabbing onto giraffes to climb upwards or swinging off monkeys, the levels here boast a simple story of the buffalo going on a rampage and figuring out what's wrong with them. These snippets are presented through simple speech bubbles, the characters expressing themselves through more visual and colourful appearances. Much of these sequences are inspired by real-world events. Mexico's Day of the Dead festival and the Badlands of Old play a role in 2 level sets. Oftentimes, the lighting will change to reflect the mood. Venturing into the darkness in the wedding stage involves a dog that aids in both platforming and visibility by following along. One thing I always liked is how each set flows into the next one. help out the curators in one stage, and they'll transport you into the next one. While connected level transitions hadn't yet arrived in LittleBigPlanet, the efforts to string them together both in-game and on the map screen are equally engaging. The same is true of the music. Marked by the placement of small radios, the soundtrack shifts from one track to the next throughout the levels. In keeping with the game's charming tone, every piece complements the stages flawlessly. Branching off from the main levels are a collection of mini-games which are unlocked by collecting keys. Most of them are about getting high scores. For the first game in its series, LittleBigPlanet's selection is fairly standard. At one point you'll be leaping around on bounce pads while avoiding obstacles, and the next you'll be partaking in a vehicle race. The latter is often woven into the levels to speed things along, and so too are the set pieces that really push players to the limit. We have chase sequences from giant creatures, using flying vehicles to journey between towers, and even fully fledged boss fights involving specific items. In these sequences you'll either aim for the boss's weak points, or in the canyon's case, use explosives. They definitely ramp up the challenge, especially with such slim windows to dodge attacks. The final stage of the islands, for example, is a test of patience. Moving this egg closer and closer to Oni is the way to win, but you'll have to jump away before his volley of projectiles hits. You'll also come across trickier obstacles. These spinners are far tougher to navigate than simply swinging across gaps, relying on good timing to both reach the next platform and snag prize bubbles on the way through. LittleBigPlanet ends with a suitably cold reception. Heading to the layer of the Collector, we come to the toughest levels in the game, where you'll have to perfect your timing and jumping accuracy. The bunker is definitely the height of difficulty here, with a massive spinning wheel to leap your way through towards the end. When it comes to tackling the Collector himself, we have a giant contraption with multiple weak points that need to be hit. The story mode concludes, fittingly enough, with a simple message: join the LittleBigPlanet community and get stuck into creating your own levels. As far as single player modes go, it's pretty abrupt, but when it comes to nudging the player to what the game really wants you to engage with, it's a worthy segue. Let's talk about that component now. When talking about user-generated content in gaming, most would point to the modding scene. It's been a part of the PC community for decades, with thousands of fan creations making their way to sites like the Nexus. Console players had to wait a lot longer for this functionality. 1 year before LittleBigPlanet, Bungie's Halo 3 broke new ground with Forge mode, but that was only level editing, not creation. In 2008, console players had never seen anything like this before, and LittleBigPlanet scooped both high acclaim and well-deserved awards for innovation. Launching from either a blank or established canvas, you're let loose with a thermometer measuring how much you can place into a given creation. Before that though, you'll need to head through a few tutorials, which are once again delivered by Stephen Fry. Being able to quickly hover around your creation and switch to play mode quickly is a solid starting point. But arguably the most important tool in your pocket is the Pop-It cursor. Acting as a mouse, it's used to pick up, edit and alter the placement of every item you use. You'll notice how it takes the form of a lasso in Sackboy's hand, another neat detail. The way Media Molecule mapped the controls is incredibly intuitive, making use of every button on the DualShock 3 controller. This goes hand in hand with the free planes and the game's physics system. Where you place items and how they are stuck together will react immediately on exiting the Pop-It menu. Suspending objects in the air, making mechanisms that connect to level components, and ensuring that levels don't break as you play through them are all parts of the creation process. Sure, you could make a simple platforming challenge from A to B, but a level to the same caliber as the story mode would always take time, patience, and a lot of effort. It didn't take long for the first LittleBigPlanet to take off, with thousands of levels uploaded in its heyday. By December 2008, Sony claimed that almost 180,000 levels had been created, leading the way for user-generated content on consoles. Of course, these often ranged in quality. Some were purely dedicated to unlocking trinkets or pursuing trophies, but others went a step further. Once users mastered the many tools and mechanisms at their disposal, there were some truly excellent creations, including full-on renditions of other popular titles. LittleBigPlanet and its sequels received downloadable content, a lot of it actually. Numerous costumes, level packs, and other additions arrived in the franchise through the years. According to the series wiki, 154 pieces of DLC were available for the first game alone. If these games had come out in the late 2010s, the temptation to monetize the package with a virtual currency may have reared its ugly head. As it stands, the most well-known content pack was Metal Gear Solid. Being a big fan of Guns of the Patriots at the time, I bought into it. The result was 5 levels, a set of costumes, and a multitude of new features. What I appreciate most about this DLC is how it leverages the game's 2D perspective to create varied scenarios alongside an impressive recreation of a separate franchise. The Paintinator, a pea shooter that fires as fast as you can tap R1, delivers enemy health bars and even cover-based gameplay. What makes LittleBigPlanet unique as a platformer is how its base can be tweaked and configured in differing ways. You aren't locked to running from left to right or top to bottom. The Metal Gear Solid DLC spoke to the oodles of potential the series would have going forward, especially the final fight against Metal Gear Rex. After porting the original game to the PSP in 2009, Media Molecule quickly set their sights on the sequel. The gathering momentum for the PlayStation 3 continued to increase between 2009 and 2013. Media Molecule's follow-up would be first out of the gate in January 2011. Marketed as a platform for games, the developer set about making improvements to the game engine and lighting systems. They were also keen to ensure that previous creations were not made obsolete. This is immediately apparent when you boot it up, with the game asking if you want to import your LBP1 profile into the sequel. This consideration was crucial to LBP's place in the online scene, and ensured that the community wouldn't become fractured or divided over time. Beyond these quality of life improvements, what LittleBigPlanet 2 did was build off an already strong base with new perspectives, gadgets, and features. The creative sandbox expanded to include an array of genres, from the top-down racer to the twin-stick shooter. The game was met with equal if not more acclaim from the masses, though as I mentioned in my Resistance retrospective, 2011 was a crowded year for gaming. I skipped on LBP2 at first in favour of other titles. Years later, I finally finished it for this video. It's safe to say that Media Molecule put out another big hit. Just like the first game, LBP2 has an interactive prologue, but you'll immediately notice a more overt cinematic flair. This is the game's cutscene system, and it introduces the story's villain right from the outset. The Negativitron is a mechanical monstrosity hoovering up countless individuals from across the LBP galaxy. With the various camera angles pointing upwards, we get a sense of this behemoth bearing down on Sackboy. These flourishes continue as we're introduced to fully voiced characters and dramatic camera angles that really hammer home their appearance. Taking the next step from the original, these NPCs are now full-on characters who move around the levels with you. The first of these is Larry da Vinci, a classical-sounding fellow who guides you through the initial set of courses in his workshop. Once again, it's the little touches that make LBP's world stand out. Even Sackboy's death animations are laced with their own personality. He can be crushed, dissolved, electrocuted, or blown up, with the latter leaving the character covered in soot. Every aspect of the game's presentation works to sell its world. The game's physics remain a permanent fixture, and you'll be hard-pressed to get every item on every stage. This also applies to the bounce pads, which are far more prevalent than they were in the original. Your character flips and pirouettes for some added charisma, and by combining level components, alternative platforming challenges emerge. In the opening levels, you're also introduced to the grappling hook. By aiming with the right stick and holding R1, Sackboy can latch onto obstacles out of reach. With that said, it's a shame it can't also be used to grab those harder to reach prize bubbles. You'll grapple onto a point, then use the bounce pads to launch yourself up to the next section. Combining these tools together is key to LittleBigPlanet 2's success, and it continues throughout the story mode. It also maintains the same replayability as the original, with the returning two-player puzzles and parts of the level that need an extra player to grab out-of-reach prize bubbles. Media Molecule made sure other elements were better implemented too. For example, the score bubbles were previously used solely for leaderboards and bragging rights. Now they add to the replayability via these machines that give more prize bubbles for specific thresholds. Equally welcomed are the use of full-on level transitions. Whether it's a checkpoint that leads into the next challenge, or hopping back into your pod to journey to the next area. By including these in the story mode, the developer encourages the player to do the same with their own creations. Rather than playing a single user creation and moving on, an entire series of levels can be crafted. This structure persists across the 6 level sets, which proceed into Victoria's laboratory. This delicious delight features a splattering of cake and a pair of new gadgets. First up is the Grabinator, which allows Sackboy to pick up and throw specific objects. It's a handy bit of tech, but its best use comes with grabbing the explosives that blew you up before and hurling them back at your foes. The second gadget is the Creatinator. In the story mode, this device is used to create your own platforms to jump on, but it can also be configured to generate any object. As opposed to being used for a single set piece, each new item in LittleBigPlanet 2 comprises more than one role. As far as variety goes, LittleBigPlanet 2 introduces more kinetic setups across the board. Levels move along the environment like this train sequence, and bosses don't always stay in one place, as they clamber up to the next arena with you. Last but not least, we have the Sackbots. These little guys remind me of the Gadgetbots from the Ratchet & Clank series. They make their debuts in the Factory of a Better Tomorrow stage, which utilises a dingy and downbeat tone throughout. Generally, the Sackbot's AI patterns work well, but there are moments where the free plane system can cause some abrupt death. They're often tied to rewards, as making it through without losing a single robot will deliver more prizes. At first their behaviour is set to run away from the player, identifiable by their yellow eyes. This influences how you'll make your way through the stages. Of course, they can also be picked up and thrown around to hit switches. Once reprogrammed, they then start to follow you, or in the case of the last level, flee from danger. While it's true some set pieces are repeated, they can come with a twist or two. Escaping from this robot chicken features a second scoreboard where you'll have to run a bit further to beat the level. Even the mini-games have seen a notable facelift, especially with the racetracks. When launching, the camera will flip to a top-down perspective, and you'll find yourself guiding rats and other creatures around a course. These levels would eventually pave the way for both LittleBigPlanet karting and a Vita port 1 year later, which speaks volumes of LBP2's success. By shifting and adapting to different types of games, the series became a broader palette that expanded level creation exponentially. While the gameplay remained mostly unchanged, the design template went much further. At the game's halfway point, we come to Avalonia, ruled over by the cocky Avalon Centrifuge. Where the previous curator was downbeat and melancholy, this guy is larger than life, always talking about how cool he is. Flamboyant characters aside, this is easily the weakest section of the story mode. When you look beyond the Blade Runner-inspired landscape, the levels are rather spacious. This is to ensure the vehicles have enough room to move around, but it comes at the cost of complexity. Instead of manoeuvring through cleverly designed obstacle courses, you're bouncing around wide squares that serve as training grounds. All 3 vehicles boast health bars and control differently. The robot's rabbit feels a bit unwieldy at times. You'll find yourself leaping off the sides of walls just as much as the ground as you aim your ground pound on enemies. Luckily, the other vehicles fare better. This rolling hamster has a great sense of speed, and powering up ramps is satisfying. The Flying Bee is easily the best of the bunch, as it's applied to both platforming and shooting contexts. Lifting Sackbots from one place to another, then partaking in an arcade shooter sequence, fully utilises the new perspective. As you fly the bee through the level, the aesthetics change with it, looking very much like a retro shooter by the end. Even if this level set doesn't match other creations, the overall look is still on top form. LittleBigPlanet 2's soundtrack is also well produced. For the second title, the music is split into 4 categories: linear, interactive, cinematic, and sequenced. All are placed where they should be along the game's story mode. Avalonia is followed up by a return to the South American rainforest. In the same way the Sackbots act as friendly AI companions, the enemies now have their own built-in intelligence. A firestorm is consuming this setting, and the Negativitron's minions follow you, spreading hazardous obstacles wherever they go. To counter these guys, you receive your own portable fire hose. In this way, you're not simply making your way through the levels, you're restoring a natural landscape to its former glory. The boss fight of this stage is highly inventive, as you take on a hostile virus that brings to mind twin-stick shooters like Geometry Wars. Moving around the ring and launching projectiles, it's a great change of pace. What comes next is a short break before the finale. You can hop around your spaceship, talk to your allies, and even hop on some basic arcade machines. We even get an anti-gravity sequence that brings to mind the Super Mario Galaxy games. LittleBigPlanet 2 is constantly switching things up, without losing sight of its accessible platforming roots. The last set of levels see you confront the Negativitron on a ruined moon. An apocalyptic fire rages out of control, and you'll have to track down your comrades and prepare for a final showdown. Of course, the difficulty ramps up considerably, and the momentum pushes you forward. The Sackbots become a full-on platoon, firing lasers at anyone who gets in your way, while the flying bee returns to give you a lift to the next area. This kind of culmination is generally reserved for big-budget 3D titles, but Media Molecule's ability to recreate it here is worthy of praise. The confrontation itself is a 3-part boss fight that's easily the most climactic encounter of the entire franchise. You'll start in a wide room using the rolling hamster to blast your way to the weak points. Following this, it's a flurry of swings with the grappling hook. And to finish, you're in a narrow room dodging laser blasts. All 3 stages are both challenging and highly enjoyable. With the threat eliminated, the Alliance heads home. Sackboy found himself a circle of buddies, but the player receives another round of inspiration to get creating themselves. An increased feature set brings greater enhancements, and LittleBigPlanet 2's Create mode takes some notable steps forward, starting with the initial guides. A whopping 67 tutorials are accessible in LBP2, and they all do a great job of covering the many new features added. On top of that, they can all be unlocked at once, ensuring players can jump into the mode quickly. Creating levels maintains the same rules and physics as LittleBigPlanet 1. According to a Eurogamer article, 3.6 million levels were uploaded by the end of 2011, an enormous increase on its predecessor. LittleBigPlanet was now one of PlayStation's biggest franchises. In terms of platform success stories, Media Molecule's IP was right up there with the likes of Mass Effect, Gears of War, Assassin's Creed, BioShock, and other titans of the 7th generation. While the series could never be as popular as Mario, it became a leading voice for platformers on Sony hardware. For the next 3 years, some awesome levels would arrive on the Share Moon. LittleBigPlanet 2's success would also be seen through further DLC collaborations. The series continued to hook in other franchises, including DC Comics and even Toy Story. The latter turned out to be a great fit for the series, crossing over with one of Pixar's most beloved properties. Even better was how it used the game's new perspectives to create a more diverse set of levels, with one involving a top-down escort quest from one side of the map to the other. Other releases like Infamous 2 and Killzone 3 also made appearances, furthering the franchise's ability to break down barriers between entertainment properties. It's a lot like Nintendo's Super Smash Bros. In that regard, bringing together characters of all stripes. With its popularity now widely established, most expected a third LittleBigPlanet game. It would eventually arrive from a different development studio. Between 2013 and 2015, Media Molecule were hard at work on Tearaway, an IP heavily integrated into the PlayStation Vita. While the game received high praise, it was let down by the poor performance of its system. To continue the LittleBigPlanet series, Sumo Digital were brought in with some assistance from the original creators. Sumo have had their ups and downs over the years. Sonic and Sega All-Stars Racing proved to be one of the better Mario Kart imitators in 2010, while 2019's Crackdown 3 was a massive disappointment on every level. This dev team is often brought in to continue franchises or manage ports to other platforms. In the case of LittleBigPlanet 3, they concluded the trilogy, albeit to far less fanfare than its predecessors. Whenever a big franchise transfers to another handler, there's always going to be some diminished interest. A new developer, combined with other upcoming major titles, meant LBP3 didn't receive nearly as much interest, despite releasing on both PS3 and PS4. Personally, I didn't have much time for the third chapter, as I was in the middle of university studies back then. This retrospective marks the first time I've played through it. In the end, Sumo Digital, with further support from other studios like Supermassive Games, did an admirable job concluding the series, but it's still the weakest of the mainline releases, thanks to technical idiosyncrasies and a lesser use of its new tools. As of this video's release, however, it's easily the best way to experience the original trilogy. Every last bit of content has been assimilated into the third entry. Being the most recent mainline release, it's also more likely to have its servers reconnected. Shortly after the events of the last game, Sackboy runs across a helmeted figure named Newton, who transports him to the land of Bunkum. Voiced by Hugh Laurie, it turns out he's a sly trickster who wants to use 3 mythical titans to make Bunkum more creative. Things don't go according to plan, as Newton becomes possessed by the 3 spirits and Sackboy has to stop him. So begins the franchise's final romp through more whimsical environments. The training ground is Nanapud's Stitcher Manor. In keeping with the progression of LBP2, the sequel also features interconnected levels. First we arrive at Needlepoint Peaks, then we approach in Newton's airship, and finally reach the house itself. The cutscene system isn't quite as extravagant this time around, but it continues to imbue the plot with a higher flair than other 2D platformers. LittleBigPlanet 3 feels a bit disjointed with its opening. Instead of an initial prologue, we're taken straight to the pod and its menus. The smaller details set the third LittleBigPlanet apart from Media Molecule's efforts in a less positive light. Unfortunately, the game's optimization could have used some tuning up as well. On occasion, the game will pause for a brief moment, and the load times are far more disruptive than they were before. Because these issues weren't present in the first 2 games, they really stick out from the overall package. Shortly after beginning the story mode, you'll quickly notice LBP3's approach, using gadgets and contraptions to make your way through. One of the main focuses of the game is plane transitions. As opposed to simply jumping in and out of the dimensions, bounce pads, slides and climbing frames are all used to move Sackboy back and forth. Each is very intuitive to use. Press X on the blue pads and hold R1 to climb. It gives the protagonist more ways to move through the levels without diluting its roots. Your first bit of tech is the Pumpinator, which uses gusts of wind to blow away or bring platforms towards you. It's the only tool that works hand in hand with the game's physics, something I wish the game did more often. The hook hat and blink ball are mainly used for traversal, ziplining from one plane to another or simply teleporting to a specific point. Both mix up the gameplay a little bit. All these items can be swapped out with a push of the circle button. Power-ups have been a part of countless platformers over the years, and some reviewers have brought up how situational they can be. Making these upgrades permanent fixtures in Sackboy's arsenal is a worthy step, though it doesn't translate into the levels very much. Generally, only one gadget will be needed for traversal, and the final unlock, the Illuminator, is only used for revealing prize bubbles within paintings. What's more inconsequential are the hubs you hang out in between levels. These sections are an effort to set the game's adventure mode apart from its predecessors and add some extra interactivity, but it doesn't offer much beyond what a map screen can accomplish. They do bring special score bubbles that can be used at in-game stores on costumes, thankfully with no microtransactions in sight. Instead of mini-games, we now have challenge rooms that are also integrated into the main hubs. While many of these are tailored to new characters, others don't fare as well. This early sideshow sees you build a car and race it, but due to limited creative options, you'll find yourself retrying it several times or just abandoning it altogether due to a lack of speed. That's not to say LBP3 doesn't offer anything unique. On occasion, the game will offer a gameplay facet to switch things up, such as these stealth sequences in Manglewood. It's a simple case of staying out of the searchlights, but at the same time it doesn't go beyond what the Metal Gear Solid DLC did in the first game. If anything, that's the missed potential of LittleBigPlanet 3. They had 2 whole games worth of features to consolidate into one larger title, but they continued down a more iterative direction. Beating all main levels in a hub world will bestow marbles which open the way to the final boss of that stage. Once you clear these, the game's newest additions will be unlocked. The levels proceed like you would expect. You enter a new area, meet a new curator or two along the way, and collect prizes. In this game, the bubbles seem to rain down on a far more frequent basis. Be that as it may, the environmental variety also feels more limited this time. There are only 3 settings, which the game refers to as books. No matter which one you're in, they lack the distinctive tones of previous games. Sure, they do continue the franchise's patchwork art style, but there isn't as much to set the worlds apart from each other outside of the changing colour palette. At the very least, the music still fits well. The list of composers for LittleBigPlanet 3 was large, and they all do a good job picking up where the previous developer left off. LittleBigPlanet 3's greatest contribution is 3 more playable characters, diversifying the gameplay and creating different approaches. Titles like Spyro 3 Year of the Dragon have done this before, and Sumo Digital's efforts follows that example. The main gameplay hook is still based in platforming and never becomes muddled. This is why the vehicles have mostly been ditched in favour of changes to movements. Interestingly, both Oddsock and Toggle seem to ditch the floaty jumps of past games. They feel much more agile and precise as a result. Oddsock, who I dressed up as a robot dog, can run faster, leap between and slide down walls. You're forced to move quickly in his levels, often with environmental hazards chasing you down. Toggle is more of a hybrid, swapping between light and heavy modes. One form can walk on water and jump higher, the other weighs down switches to serve as a launch pad. As for Swoop, bringing full-on flight to the LBP series is a simple yet effective gameplay style. I dressed him up as a colourful toucan. While at first Swoop's levels are relatively tame with a large margin for error, you're soon asked to navigate through tight passages at a higher speed. His dive ability is crucial here, relying on momentum and speed to evade danger. Once this bird is unlocked, the end of the game isn't far away. A shame considering there could have been more levels for the 3 sidekicks to partake in. There's a fair bit of trial and error as well, with obstacle courses sending you back to the start with regular fading to black. This grows more common as you reach the story's ending. In The Great Escape, Book 3 extends into the last chapter. With Sackboy kidnapped by Newton, his 3 friends set out to rescue him. Using Oddsock, Toggle and Swoop in turn, you'll make your way through some tricky courses to deactivate 3 switches. With this completed, the purple Titan will emerge. It's a bit disappointing that there isn't a fight with Newton himself. Instead, we get this infernal machine that does make good use of character swapping to move between stages. Toggle is first up on the roster, smashing his way through barricades and planting an explosive in just the right spot. A great use of his abilities. Next, it's up to Swoop to fly through the interior and plant an internal detonation. With the walls closing in on our daring bird, you'll have to be incredibly precise. Sackboy lands the finishing blow, and we wrap things up with Oddsock escaping from the rising water. Success in all 4 stages sees Newton return to normal and the characters transported back to Craftworld. When compared with previous games, LittleBigPlanet 3's conclusion is mostly passable by comparison, but the Create mode does make up for it. Collectively, LittleBigPlanet 3 comprises the most content of the series, consolidating resources from all 3 games in the trilogy to deliver a brilliant canvas to craft on. Even if the games are markedly similar to each other, the depths players can dive when it comes to creativity have only grown wider over time. The first game used 3 to 4 planes, but the third has over 10 to swap between. This ensures the highest level of complexity in stage creation. With that said, LBP3 seems to contribute the least to the overall canvas. The game features pop-it puzzles, which are really glorified tutorials masquerading as levels. In the early going, it's a case of using your pop-it cursor to add or remove materials from the stages. The guides within the Create mode itself have also been cut down to 25, with several showing how to play the game. The omission of Stephen Fry is curious, as is the choice to place the advanced tutorials online via YouTube and other sites. Players who already know the mode inside and out will already be familiar with how everything works, but newcomers may have a longer road to engage with it. Creations continue to be uploaded for the rest of the 2010s. Considering the onset of the 8th generation, LittleBigPlanet 3 had the lowest amount of DLC released, while also incorporating content from its predecessors. Being able to transfer downloads across games is a rare practice in the industry, something other corporations would consider in an ideal world. Both Adventure Time and Back to the Future received level packs, with the 80s classic offering a hoverboard for faster traversal. For the most part, it was all about the costume packs. EA of all studios seemed to take a particular interest this time, with costume sets from Mirror's Edge, Plants vs Zombies and Dragon Age all taking their place in the LBP collection. Most of these downloads took advantage of then current game releases, including a few franchises from PlayStation 4. When LBP3's content run finally concluded, the franchise would go on hiatus for the next 6 years. The legacy of LittleBigPlanet can be seen in the many creation-focused games that arrived since its release. Minecraft, Terraria, and Roblox might not exist if Media Molecule hadn't pioneered user-generated content on consoles. Even Nintendo and Microsoft took note of the franchise's success. Super Mario Maker would arrive in 2015, allowing fans to create their own platforming levels for the first time, and Project Spark allowed for full-on level creation in a 3D environment. Media Molecule, ever able in its pursuit of the next big advancement, has now released Dreams, another tremendous leap forward when it comes to user-generated content. It's still early days for this title, but countless inventive designs have already emerged. As for LittleBigPlanet, well, it's often at the whims of servers that have had trouble staying afloat in recent years. Every online title dreads its expiration date, in which both content and community are lost. The 2021 backlash against Sony's now scrapped network closure on PS3 is proof of that. Sumo Digital are now the full custodians of the series, putting out Sackboy: A Big Adventure on PlayStation 5 last year. It aims to offer a stellar 3D platforming experience on the current console, while also leaving behind the creation modes that stamp the series onto the scene. Sumo Digital was recently acquired by Chinese giant Tencent, who have steadily been making waves in the Western gaming world, Community members hope this will trigger a relaunching of the Trilogy servers. Considering LittleBigPlanet 3 came out on PlayStation 4 and its successor has backwards compatibility, this could happen with the right support. Thanks to the efforts of Media Molecule to import elements and profiles through the entire trilogy, the games won't need to be rebuilt from scratch, but any relaunch would require collaboration from Sony. Where Sackboy goes from here is anyone's guess, but his adventures have made a massive impact, not just on PlayStation, but the entire gaming landscape. Thanks for watching. LittleBigPlanet lives on to this day thanks to its massive community and the passion they have for making levels. Which title in the trilogy was your favourite? Did you end up moving to Dreams on PS4, or are you still hopping around as Sackboy to this day? Let me know in the comments below. You can follow my blog and channel at the links in the description.